lecture is basically just to get an overview over the roles, because we will use them and you will see them, so you have a brief understanding of how this works. And later on we will have also a dedicated section about access management, privileges, roles, and so on. So don't worry, we will dive deeper into this later on, but for now let's first of all have an overview over this. So you can see that we have those system roles, and also we have the role org admin that is a bit outside of this hierarchy, but this is basically the hierarchy of roles in Snowflake. So here you can see that the public role is assigned always actually to every user that is created. And then when we assign privileges, this is what we are doing. How this works, we have roles, and then we assign privileges to the roles, and this will be inherited up the hierarchy. So here you can see how this works. We have a role, this can be a system role or also a custom role that we have created. And note, when we create a custom role, it should be, as a best practice, assigned to the sysadmin, because the sysadmin is managing the warehouses and the databases mostly. This is the purpose. And then in this case, it makes sense to assign the custom role as a best practice to the sysadmin. And why this is exactly the case, we also talk about in the dedicated section for the access management. So in general, as we have said, we assign privileges to roles using the grant command, and then afterwards we can also grant and revoke those privileges. For example, a select on a table so that a table can be seen, and then every user that is having this role assigned is now able to then do this, what the privilege says. So again, we can then also grant the roles also using the grant command to the user. So we grant permissions to the role, privileges, and then the role will be granted to users. This is basically how it works, and one user can have multiple roles assigned to them. So we talk about this later on in more detail, and every user always needs to have also a current role in the session. So if we jump into our account, we can see if we go into a specific worksheet, then also every query will be also executed using a specific role. And then always when we, for example, create an object, the owner of this object will be the role that has created this object. So we have also this concept of ownership. This is also important because every object is usually owned by a role. So when we create it, by default, this is the owner. So this is basically how it works. And then, as we have said, we have those system-defined roles. They can't be dropped, and we can add privileges to it, but we cannot revoke privileges. But again, we talk in more detail about this later on. For now, we just briefly want to mention we have the custom roles should be assigned to the sysadmin, and outside of this hierarchy we also have the org admin. So this is something that you might notice, and this is basically managing actions on an organizational level. So if you have multiple accounts, this is the role that can create additional accounts. We talk also about read accounts and so on. So this is something that can be done here also for the org admin to do those organizational level, and this is therefore a little bit outside of the hierarchy. Then we have the account admin. So this is the actual top level role of our hierarchy, and everything will be always inherited, all of the privileges up to the account admin. So this is a very strict role because it's a very powerful, the most powerful role. So we should be very careful because this has a lot of privileges, including also managing the share and reader accounts. So we can create those share and reader accounts. And we talk about this later on. For now, we just briefly want to mention the overview. So security admin is managing the grants globally. This means that we can manage the grants of the privileges. So we can create and monitor the users and the roles. So here, of course, the user admin is able to create the users, and the security admin is able to manage the security part of that. So here also all of the user admin privileges will be therefore, of course, inherited. And then we have also the sysadmin. So basically they are doing all of the warehouse management and the database management and the object project management. And this is exactly the reason why we have to assign the custom roles to this role, because then otherwise it could create some conflicts when the sysadmin is creating a database, and then with the access we would get some problems. But we talk about this in more detail as mentioned later on. We have also the user admin, basically creating the users and the create role. So create users and create roles. So this is the management of the users. And finally, as we have said, we have also the public role. So this is the role when we need no access. This is just the default role. So every user that is created will have this role assigned. And this is, therefore somehow some kind of a pseudo role. So it will always be assigned. And then again, we can create those hierarchies, which don't worry about it now too much. This is something more for later. So of course, this is just the brief overview so that you have heard a little bit about those roles. What are the broad differences, and into the details we will dive in later on. So hope it was helpful, and see you.